Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar around implementing technology. Thank you all for joining us nice and early, and it's great to see some people diving into the webinar as we speak. I'm joined by a couple of really great guests here today, and I will do some introductions with them as soon as we get just past the hour. I'm always a fan of giving people a minute or two to dial in, and then obviously we will get going. But welcome. I'm guessing wherever you are in the world today, it's probably as wet as it is down in the south coast this morning. It's grim. It's grim down south today, gents. And I know Simon is in our London office today, and it's always fun when it rains in London, isn't it, Simon? Like it's just like on the roof.
Yeah, on the roof of the building, it's quite noisy. Hence why I'm now downstairs, not on the upper floor, to try and not drum everything out with the sound of the rain.
Yeah, a flat roof, a flat metal roof, and winter rain is always a guarantee for noise, which is interesting. So, okay, cool. Well, look, we're 1 minute past the hour, so I will get going. I'm just doing a little bit of housekeeping first. So we anticipate this webinar going about 45 to 60 minutes. There will be time for questions throughout the webinar. However, if you do have a burning question that you're wanting to ask, you can use the Q&A box on the screen. So if you're used to Zoom, and most of us are now after 2.5 years of pandemics and everything else, you can drop a question into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We will be running a couple of polls throughout the session, so please do vote on them. That's always a good way to start. And of course, if you want to engage with your colleagues or have a chat or whatever, you can jump into the chat box as well, and kind of say hi and kind of let everyone know whereabouts in the world or in the country you are. So that's kind of the housekeeping for today. And as I always say, because it never gets a laugh, so I'll keep trying it until one day it might do. There's no scheduled fire alarms today. So if the fire alarm does start going off, you will see us run out of our buildings today. So, but never gets a laugh. Anyway, we'll move on. So look, today is all about implementing technology. And this came from a session that I did on Custom Community Live not that long ago with one of my guests here today. And it was a fascinating conversation. We really started to kind of unpick some of the challenges and opportunities around implementing new technology in accountancy firms and some of the learnings. So I think it actually would be worth bringing on kind of someone else from our side and bringing that guest back as well to kind of dive deeper into this topic and kind of see what we can do to explore it a bit further. So my guests for today joining me on this webinar. First up, we've got Simon Kershaw, who is Director of Technology here at Wolters Kluwer. Good morning, Simon. Did I get your job title right, by the way?
You did. Good morning. Thank you for that. Yeah, always good to get the job title right.
I was doing it, did that bit without the notes. So, and then joining us, someone that you may well know from that Custom Community Live, but also is very active out there talking about technology at events, shows, and podcasts, including his own podcast. I've got John Toome from Beaver and Struthers and various other podcasts and stuff. Morning, John.
Morning, Phil. Morning, everyone else. Nice to see you all. It's going to be an exciting session if my week's webinars is anything to go by so far.
Yes, you've had an exciting week talking about technology and bits and pieces this week, haven't you, John? And I'm sure hopefully we won't dive too deep into some of those bits. So look, before we get going, I want to run our first of 3 polls today. So Steph is here with us in the background. So I want to ask this question. How many pieces of software have you implemented in the last 12 months? So how many pieces of software have you implemented in the last 12 months? 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, or 7 plus. So if you could just give us your answers around that. And when we get to about 75% of you having answered, we will kind of then run a very quick second poll. So we're at 65%. So we're getting close to that magic 75% number. Majoritively, we're looking like 1 to 2 pieces of technology, right? So that's pretty interesting. Now, poll number 2, please, Steph. To what extent was the implementation of this technology successful? So we're looking at a scale here, so between 0 and 5. So out of all the technology you implemented, how many or how successful would you say those implementations were. And again, when we get to about 75% of everyone answering, we will crack on with our core content for the day. Interesting, the majority of the results, John and Simon, are going around the 1, 2, and 3 mark out of 5, assuming that we are looking at the scale of 0 being least and 5 being most. So the majority is around the 2, 3, and 4 mark, which means we're implementing technology, but we might not necessarily be implementing it as successfully as we could. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. I did forget one thing. I forgot my own introduction. So I'm Phil Hobson, head of digital sales specialist product here at Wolters Kluwer. So I look after One-Click, Basecamp, Finsit, Twinfield, and some of our newer products that are coming down the line from a sales perspective. Forgot that bit. So we've kind of looked at where people are implementing and how they're implementing. So let's kick off. John, over to you first, I guess. So are you surprised by those results in terms of kind of the level of success in implementation?
Not at all. I guess it's a problem that I've experienced in practice, and it's a problem that I know we sort of talk about ad nauseum is implementing change in practices, particularly not particularly technological change, but any kind of change really. I think is always a challenge, particularly for the types of customers that you guys will have as well, which tend to be at the larger end of the market. It's that you've got multiple challenges, different offices, different departments, different levels of engagement, as we talked about previously on the previous previous webinar, it's the biggest challenge I think is really around communication of the benefits of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to implement, and then maximizing the benefits out the other side. And quite often, I think one of the areas where we fall down as firms when we're making changes is that we kind of get to that implementation point and then stop. And we don't follow up, and that's where you tend to lose the momentum and lose the opportunity to actually gauge how successful a project is, and if it's not being as successful as anticipated, to try and steer that back on course to make it more successful.
And Simon, how about you? Were you surprised by the results there, or was that kind of what you were thinking?
No, it's probably about right, and I think it's interesting that some are in the higher end and some in the lower. I think to build on what John was saying, I think the key things for me always, and we'll get into the detail of this, I'm sure, but I think we talk about how to best implement technology, but also that implementation doesn't stop on the go live. It is that, as John was alluding to there, you have to monitor what were your success criteria going into the implementation. How do you know whether it's successful or not? And how do you potentially adjust or change in any way, shape, or form, or do something slightly differently if it's not proving successful? Because that just because you might say it's not immediately successful doesn't mean it can't be. You might just need to make some simple changes post go live of whatever technology implementation you're doing. So I think that's an important part to make sure it doesn't just stop. Go live is not the final goal, actually. It's much further past that point.
Absolutely, and I guess I know we'll come on to this in a little bit, but it's also about defining success, right? We say I was deliberately vague on that question. How successfully have you implemented it? Actually, success is down to individual metrics. So look, I guess a good question is, where do people start? Let's be honest, there's more technology available for accountants today than ever, right? Over 1,000 on just the Xero marketplace. So John, where do you start when kind of reviewing the options available? What's your starting point when looking at new technology for the practice?
I mean, fundamentally, my starting point is always around a problem and solution kind of sort of process. So I'm not I'm not often sort of just finding new technology for technology's sake. More often than not, what we're trying to do is trying to look at, what are the bottlenecks in our processes? What are the challenges that our staff are facing? What are the things that's frustrating the hell out of people, basically, and then trying to figure out what we can do with that. And actually, the starting point quite often is not It's not about trying to find something new. It's about trying to look at what we're currently doing and whether we can improve what we're currently doing before we start to look at something new. So I'm a big advocate of actually looking at your processes and your systems before you start going looking for that new piece of technology that will solve all your ills.
Yeah, and that's a good. I guess that's a really good point, right? It's starting with the problem, not the solution. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of starting with the solution and finding a problem to try and weave that in. So Simon, and I'll come to you, John, on this one because I think it's a question that you could both answer. What makes a good piece of technology?
For me, it's relatively simple. That it does what you need it to do and delivers the outputs that you want. I mean, to build on a little bit on what John was answering in the previous question, I would suggest you take it a little bit step back from the problem statement as well and understand your technology strategy as an organization first. From your technology strategy, then you can make the right choices in terms of the software that you implement and the technology that you implement. And if you're doing that, then you're making sure that your technology strategy aligns with your business drivers. So what is it? What are the outcomes as a business perspective you're trying to achieve? Because at the end of the day, if the successful technology thing is about we needed something to help us with this process. We needed to, I don't know, perhaps you're trying to improve profitability by reducing costs, for example, right? So there's a really clear business driver there of what you're trying to achieve. So your really clear outcome is that you have improved profitability by reducing costs. So there's a really easy measurement to make there. And for me, successful technology is delivering what you intended it to do in the first place, or perhaps more. And I think that's really what you've got to always boil it down to is technology in isolation is not what you're looking for. You're looking for that, as John was saying, finding a solution to a problem. And now if that's aligned with your business drivers and your technology strategy, then you've got a clear path laid out for you as to what success looks like. And I think that's the key thing to always take a step back and think about when you're implementing any technology. Am I actually delivering something that's going to meet a particular business driver and solve an actual problem? And that's your success criteria right there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a very good way of looking at it. And John, how about for you? What makes a good piece of technology?
I think fairly simple for me. It just makes our staff's lives easier. If we're talking about practice tech, fundamentally that is what we're trying to achieve all the time. We're trying to make things a little bit more efficient, a little bit more effective. More often than not, when we talk about bad technology, it's easy to talk about bad technology, isn't it? It's the things that staff find frustrating. It's the processes that take 15 clicks instead of one. It's the it's the simple things like not being able to, I don't know, email a document out to a client from a piece of technology or something. And so it's more about the process. And if the staff are comfortable and happy using it, then that's a successful piece of technology. And that can be, that can be a 10-year-old piece of technology, or it can be a brand new piece of technology. It doesn't really matter what it looks and feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be right for the staff that you're implementing it for, and solve the problem that you're looking that you've defined, and you're specifically bringing that piece of technology on for. So, I guess, kind of moving down the line, we've gone to the market. We've found our problem. We've define what our success criteria is, and we kind of understand, what we're looking for in general. What's the next step, John? How do you go about assessing technology and making sure you're assessing on a like-for-like basis, right? Because there's lots of technology, and you look at the forecasting space, which is something I know well. It's something I used to be in for a long time, right? You look at that space, and there's a lot of technology that does similar stuff, but each have their own niche within their own niche, so to speak. So how do you go about assessing the technology and making sure you and the team are looking at it on a like-for-like basis?
I think, again, it comes down to having a level of process to do that. And that doesn't have to be a particularly sophisticated process. It just really means that you have to you have to be sort of fairly consistent in your approach. So, as you say, like forecasting technology, is there are niches within niches in that space. But fundamentally, for me, I'm the kind of user that needs a trial. I need to trial a product. I need to see how it works. I need to get a feel for how it works, and then I can determine whether or not that's going to be successful for us. And more often than not, when I do get my hands on a product, I do trial a product, I'll use the same group of clients or same group of clients data to trial that. So I'm then getting a consistent set of feedback, consistent set of results, so I can sort of benchmark those products against each other, if you like, and get a feel for what's going on. Generally, that's kind of my approach to it. I don't spend a lot of time on the websites because they're just marketing bullshit. They don't tell you anything. I don't spend a lot of time talking to the sales guys because all they want to do is sell you thousands of licenses at a time. I'm interested in a demo if it's useful, but more often than not, they're not massively useful. And the other thing that I'm always really interested in is, and again, this is why I always go for a trial, is I'm interested in the integrations and see where else I can take that, because it may well be that I would be looking at a product in isolation to fix one problem, but it may well be able to fix other problems that I'm not aware of without sort of seeing what else that piece of technology can do. So that's massively powerful for me. And I do spend, when I say I don't really spend a lot of time on websites, the one area on a website that I will go to is the integrations piece, and I'll be looking at what integrations are available, out of the box, and then quite often I will get lost in the web in terms of like going down through clicking into integrations that I wasn't aware of and products that maybe I'd never heard of before, and finding out what they can do and whether they can fix other problems for us along the way.
That's interesting. I like the comment about sales and marketing, and I think to a point you are right. Like everyone's trying to, it's two different angles coming at it from two different directions, right? You want to make sure it's right for your clients. The business that you're buying from wants to try and get the most amount across the line. So it's kind of trying to find that middle ground.
Well, I mean, tech websites are like accountancy websites, right? We're all proactive, incredible advisors. We don't actually do accountancy anymore. We don't even think about compliance anymore. And we're all modern, hip, totally down with technology and everything else. And the reality is it's complete bollocks. So, whatever you read on a website, it's the shop front, isn't it? It doesn't really tell you anything about what's going on underneath the hood.
It's almost like we're not your average accountant, right? We're not your standard accountant, which is now on so many websites that you kind of go, well, what is a standard accountant now? Because everyone isn't the standard one. It's the same with technology people, right? It's not your standard bit of technology, but then you kind of go, well, what is then? So Simon, there's some good tips from John there around kind of the tech side, but anything you would kind of add to that around kind of assessing technology, anything you do when you're looking at it from a kind of a business perspective, say for
So one of the things I will tend to always do is create a defined set of selection criteria, which is effectively a requirements list, isn't it? It's what do I need this thing to do? How do I want it to operate? What timescales do I want to do? Is there costs involved? All those kind of bits and pieces. And then you're marking basically each of the vendors and products that you're looking at in your selection process against the same benchmark. And then you can make some decisions about which ones you're going to go through. And absolutely echo what John says about trialing pilots. You don't know whether it's going to work until you try it, is the ultimate point, I think, for me. I mean, and making sure you're talking to your users in that pilot is a really important part of it, because you getting that user feedback. Even when we flip it slightly, obviously I deal with a lot of product delivery, as opposed to just going and buying things off the shelf, right? And it's the same in that space. You don't know that your product or your things are going to do what you expect it to do until you've actually had people use it live in the wild, as it were. Because you can guarantee that somebody somewhere is not going to use something how you expect them to. And that's the really important part of the feedback you'll get. So I think having a clear set of selection criteria, so you know exactly what you're looking for, and you can make data-driven decisions based on what you find during those trials and pilots, and then really making the selection based on what meets your needs best, and also understanding in those selection criteria what kind of tolerance you have. So maybe cost is my main driver. And so therefore I can't go above a certain price point, so I might compromise on some functionality somewhere. But maybe cost isn't my driver. And if it's not, then maybe I'll take in more functionality to get the best deal I possibly can. So I think, selection criteria in pilots and trials are definitely the way to go. They're the only true way of understanding is how something's going to behave in your particular space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really interesting. So John, I mean, you mentioned APIs, and that's a weird and kind of integrations. That's a really interesting point around that, and something I maybe hadn't necessarily thought would be a selection criteria. Is there anything else that you like to see from a vendor before you kind of finally jump in and make the purchase? And one thing that I've heard before, when I had a previous conversation, was roadmap. So, a lot of people are assessing the roadmap to make sure that there is a clear and concise roadmap for the future of the product. So is there anything else you like to see from a vendor when you're making those decisions?
I mean, there's a few things. I mean, you obviously mentioned APIs, and I mentioned integrations. I mean, I think there's a slight nuance difference there, right? So one of the things that we've been talking about in this space, and I've been talking about, and millions of others who basically don't have real jobs have been talking about for a long time, is the fact that you should go to a vendor and ask them if they've got an open API. And that's great, right? Until you go back to the office and then you find out that there's nobody in the office who can actually do anything with an open API because you don't have any developer skills, you don't have any of the skills necessary to build integrations, to make those connections work for you. So an open API in a product is only as good as the skills that you've either got in-house or the skills that you can outsource to build a connection if that's what you want to do with the product. That's why I like to see what in-product live integrations are there, and also to get a gauge of like how effective those integrations are, because not all integrations are the same, and so some integrations are a one-way push, some integrations are actually just a manual intervention, which people like to badge as an integration. Some are like full two-way syncing, and pretty much as live. So there's a lot of nuance in there. In terms of what I'm particularly interested in a product, I mean, roadmap is interesting, but then I guess if I'd been asking, where CCH would have been in terms of cloud technology 10 years ago, you would have told me it was 2 or 3 years ago, and you've been telling me that for the last 8 years or so, and now we're finally on the cusp of seeing that turn into reality. So roadmap is really, really interesting, but you've got to also sort of take that with a pinch of salt, insofar as there's always going to be slippage. In dev, certain things will crop up, which will mean that particular developments will be deprioritized, particular other developments will be reprioritized, and so if you're making a decision on that one new thing that's 3 months away, you've got to be absolutely certain that 3 month timeline is going to be adhered to, because it may become 3 years or it may never actually happen. So you can't make a decision on roadmap alone. I think for me as well, the key thing is around partnerships, right? So I made that very glib comment about salespeople earlier on, just wanting to sell licenses. The reality is like, if we can get a relationship with a vendor in our market and actually build a relationship in terms of it's not just about them pushing sales down our throats, and equally, it's not us pushing back and saying, well, you're not really helping me deal with the implementation, or you're not really helping me understand the product or get more value out of the product. I think that's where partnerships are really, really valuable. And again, going back to it, I think a lot of people in our marketplace really understand that there are challenges for mid-sized firms in particular, larger firms in particular, around implementing technology, insofar as we're not particularly great at change management. We need to be held accountable sometimes when we're doing these projects, but also we need a little bit of support about trying to sell these products internally, because accountants themselves are not great salespeople either.
That's interesting, and actually, I'm about to loop on to that in terms of kind of the utilization of technology in the firm. So I think that's a good bridge. I think one thing we'll do before we go on to that, I just want to loop into our third and final poll for today. And this kind of is around where people are looking for their technology. I'm about to go to my last couple of shows for the year, which is always, off to Accounting Web Live and another event. So is it a free tech answer? Where are you looking for your technology? So is it trade shows? Is it online? Is it through webinars? Is it through existing vendors? If you could kind of pop some answers in there whilst we kind of, I'll move on to the next question. We'll leave that poll open for a little bit because it is a bit of a free text answer. But John, just really quickly before I do move on, where have you found the most useful place for you in finding that new technology? Is it shows or is it colleagues or kind of networking groups? What's the one thing that really works for you?
I think in my early days in this space, it was shows, and also it was something simple as going to like the Xero marketplace, for example, and just seeing what products and apps are in that space. More often than not now, it comes through either the networks that I'm part of in terms of, other accountants in the space, or, as I mentioned before, just getting into a new product website, finding that integration page, and then just getting lost in there for hours on end, and seeing what's out there, because there are some incredible pieces of tech out there which some of them are new and shiny and not very functional, but some of them are actually really effective and can really solve problems. And that's how you've seen practices in our space bring in products like Asana, which would never have been in the accounting space historically. That's where you see products like ClickUp and Monday.com, for example, getting leaching into our space as alternatives to sort of like practice management or task management solutions and things. So I think just sort of like taking the opportunity to see what else plugs into it. I mean, the most firms on this webinar would probably be using Microsoft, and Microsoft have an absolute ton of integrations. And I wonder how many times we actually look at the integration like marketplace that they have and just sort of see what's out there in terms of products that are available to improve the way that you work.
Good shout out for ClickUp. I'm a big fan of that very, very good bit of technology. So, Simon, I guess one of the challenges is we've found the technology. We've got an idea of the market we want and the results we want. How do we find the right person to roll this out with? Because ultimately, it's got to be someone's responsibility, right? So, what makes a good person to roll out a piece of technology?
I think it's probably one of the most difficult things, actually. It's hard to pinpoint what makes a good implementer, right? Because that's the essential question there. What makes somebody, because the person who's going to implement this is going to be the person who's almost kind of backing up the success, if you like, right? The criticality of the piece of software is going to be an important factor in that. How mission critical is that piece of software you're doing? What are you looking for from the person that's implementing? I think obviously the person's got to be engaged in it. They've got to believe that what you're going down. So through that whole process, in terms of making that selection and making sure this is the piece we want to implement, all the rest of it, that person probably has to be involved in that process, because that person has got to be thoroughly engaged and buy into the delivery of this technology. If you're just going to parachute in a project manager and say, we've already chosen everything, we've made all the decisions, here you go, go and implement that. That's probably not going to give you as consistent a result as if you've got somebody in the process from the start as part of the selection, and then we move straight into that delivery phase. So I think that's quite an important part, actually, to bring people in at an early stage so they're actually part of that decision-making process. I mean, not that it can't be successful if you don't, but I think for me, it's a far more uptick of potential success if that person's been involved from the start and bought in. And then about their ability to get the rest of the people to buy into, quite clearly. Because very rarely, depending on your size, is it going to be a one-man job to implement a new piece of technology in a business. So although you need that one leader who's going to drive it and own it, their ability to bring in the rest of the people in terms of engagement is obviously another important aspect of that. So there is no secret recipe to that, I don't believe. There is no magic, it's that one. It really is a good decision point, but I think you can certainly improve your chance of success by, as I say, making sure they're involved nice and early, making sure they're a person who can engage people really well. If we come all the way back to very early in this conversation, what John said about communication, that's clearly a massively important part. That person who's going to implement has to be very, very good at managing stakeholders. And I don't just mean up in terms of the executive sponsorship team, essentially, but also the people themselves who are going to end up using the software, because they have to be engaged, like I was talking about earlier on, need to be engaged with those end users, again, at an early stage to get their buy-in. Because again, if you've got their buy-in, then you're more likely to be successful when it comes to the round and you're actually running the software in an operational environment. So yeah, no magic wand, I'm afraid, but certainly there are things you can do to help guarantee that success a little bit earlier.
And John, kind of picking up on that, how do you, because I guess if you've got someone that's really good at implementing technology and going for that process, you've got a John Toon in your practice, right? But how do you avoid making it that the John Toon is the only person that ever gets that job of implementing the technology? Is it right to just use the same person each time, or do you have to kind of spread the load across the firm to make sure that everyone is, people aren't getting overwhelmed by this?
Well, I think firstly, if there was more than one of me in every practice, I mean, the world had gone to hell, wouldn't it? So that's an interesting proposition, and a lot of people would find me really annoying because I am a really annoying person. So I mean, one of the advantages I've got in my role, right, is that I'm more or less now not client facing. And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems that a lot of firms face, is that whenever they find something new to implement, is that quite often it's either dealt with in two ways. It's either the IT department who deal with it, and I guess that there'll be some IT people on the call, and with the best will in the world, most IT people are not implementers of new technology. They are the kind of they're the car mechanics of the practice. They keep things going. They keep our staff, our client-facing staff, going. They make sure that they can turn their laptops on. They make sure that the equipment's working properly, the software's updated, and things like that. But they're not really change management people. Other than maybe rolling out a few updates and stuff. The other side of that is that what you then tend to find is it's someone in a department, whether that's the audit department, the accounts department, the tax department, whatever, who's seen something new and exciting, comes back to the office, is really enthused about it, and then is given sort of the freedom, if you like, to implement a new piece of technology. But they're always going to have client demands on their hands. And of course, if you've got a deadline to implement something new tomorrow, and a client rings up today and says, I need this done by tomorrow, what's going to get dropped? It's always going to be the project. And that's the biggest challenge. So the firms that I've seen implement technology best, they don't necessarily have someone like me. They probably have someone much more effective and much more engaging, but they'll have someone who doesn't have as much of a client-facing role and has time and space to consider these implementations. Now, coming back to the other thing about whether or not you need to engage more people and stuff, yeah, absolutely, you do, and that sort of goes back to Simon's point in terms of having the key stakeholders involved. So you need to have some level of executive buy-in, because otherwise nothing's ever going to be successful. But you also do need to have the team involved in that. And actually, what I find is we try and get a fairly good combination of reasonably senior people and reasonably junior people involved in projects, and seek their feedback about what good is going to look like in terms of an implementation, and then also what we're expecting to get out of these products. And then revisit it in terms of seeking onward feedback post implementation, making sure that we've got connections, not one single point of failure effectively, because I think so another issue with firms is that usually the project manager, the project lead or whatever, is the person that deals with the vendor and has that relationship and is held accountable. But actually you need multiple people involved in that process, and that really helps.
I've seen it at a couple of organisations that I've worked for in the past, where you sell the piece of software to someone who's super keen, super enthused about using it. They roll it out and something else comes along, or they move on to a new role within the firm or external. And then all of a sudden that relationship's gone. There's no one to really pick it up. And then that client ends up churning within a few months, and you're back to square one, because that value piece is lost. And that was one of the biggest challenges I found, was actually, or learnings I found, was building a team that was involved in the product and project, and making sure that there's more than one person owning it and responsible for it, therefore it stands a better chance of being successful. So John, as a vendor, as a tech provider that we are, how can we and the industry better support the product champion to ensure the technology at play gets the best chance of implementation? So what can we do to support you in rolling out the technology?
I think the most important thing, as I said, is to sort of build on that relationship and then try to understand what the barriers are to a successful implementation are going to look like. As you sort of said, Phil, you've had experience of dealing with someone, who was basically me a few years ago, right? Who saw something really exciting, was really enthused about it, tried to roll it out in a practice, and then got frustrated because no one else had the same vision or the same viewpoint on a product or a piece of technology. So I think the most important thing you can do is try and work in partnership with that person, to then find out who the key stakeholders are, to then work out what that team should look like and contribute to that team in terms of making making a roadmap, if you like, to success. It's a bit of a crappy phrase, isn't it? But try to just help with that plan, rather than just sort of saying, well, look, there you go. You've had your trial, and now we're rolling out, and we're expecting 5 clients on this month, and then 10 clients on the month after, and 15 clients on the month after that. That doesn't really work. But that's not to say that you shouldn't hold that person accountable either. But the problem is you've got to make sure you're holding the right person accountable, because if the person you're talking to and trying to hold accountable has absolutely no influence, then this is pointless, a pointless exercise. So that's why it's really important to try and sort of figure out, the challenges, and that's difficult, right? That's really difficult as an external person coming into a practice which will have lots of different characters, lots of different politics, lots of different departments, offices, etc. But you've really got to establish who the key people are, and the reality is probably what you've got to do at the very outset is say to someone that whoever it is that you're dealing with, like either who is your boss if they're not a director or partner, and who do we need to talk to and have a conversation with, or if you are talking to a partner and director who frankly is not going to be the best person to roll out a piece of technology, who's someone young and enthusiastic in your team that will run with this and will give the right amount of energy to make this successful. You can be the enforcer, you can be the person that sets the rules and says to everyone else, don't arse about, well, this is the new process we're going to follow and this is a new piece of technology. But the other person can be the person that's going to be enthusiastic and communicate the message and why this piece of technology is going to be successful. I think that's the key thing to do.
Yeah, it's an interesting point about how holding people accountable, right? It's something that I learned pretty quick, is that there needs to be accountability on both sides. If you ask me to do something, then we absolutely have to deliver that. But equally, setting not necessarily targets, that's definitely not the right word to use, but setting goals or markers that we want to try and aim to get to within a certain period of time. But also being respectful of the fact that implementing technology is probably not that person's only job within the practice, certainly in smaller practices. And I think sometimes that's where that conflict comes, where you've got one person trying to implement 5 different things in a smaller practice, plus do their day job and actually earn money and kind of see clients. And that's where that conflict sometimes comes. Which I guess, Simon, brings me to my next question. Shiny penny syndrome, right? Like I'm implementing a piece of technology. This is really good. I really like this. Now I'm going to Accountex. Oh my God, look at this bit of technology, look at this bit of technology, look at this bit of technology, and I want it all. I want every piece of technology and I want to implement it now. Any tips for avoiding shiny penny syndrome? Because let's be honest, we're all guilty of it at time to time, right?
So the only thing I can really do though is take you back to the beginning, Phil, which at the risk of repeating myself slightly, does it align with your business drivers? If you've agreed as a business, here are the things that we are doing, and therefore we've got our business drivers, we've got our technology principles off the back of those business drivers, we've made the decisions of what we want to do and why we want to do it. Does that shiny thing fit into those principles? If it doesn't, then it's probably not the right thing and you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Or the world has changed in some way. I mean, I'm not even advocating the fact that, I'm going to set my technology principles and they're going to leave them alone and never look back at them again. Clearly, you need to continually review those things. The technology market does move on at a rapid pace. But again, bringing back to what John said in terms of that problem statement, what problem is that piece of technology solving for you? Because if it's not a problem you've got, then again, you shouldn't be looking at it. So I think that's generally the rule of thumb. It is always lovely to see a nice bit of tech. You go and see these wonderful virtual reality things and various augmented reality things. We're all talking about the metaverse, Web3, and all those kind of bits and pieces, which is all fantastic stuff. Continually getting pushes to, well, what are we doing in that space? Well, if you haven't got the use case, you haven't got the problem statement, you haven't got the business driver, then maybe you should be looking at that space. Hopefully, we all do. As time moves forward, we all get to that point where actually those things become very useful for us. But without those specific use cases of why you're implementing that thing, then it is just unfortunately shiny tech that you're probably not quite ready for in your business at this point. So keep those things in mind when you're going to those conferences. You're looking for things to solve problems. So don't look for things that don't solve the problems you've got.
But John, they have really nice stuff on their stand. and they've got nice gifts, and they're giving me a free pair of Nike trainers, right? Like, isn't that how it works?
I don't know what shows you're going to, Phil, but if they're giving away Nike trainers, then I'm definitely missing a trick. Look, the freebies are nice, and I mean, I wouldn't have survived lockdown without all of the free t-shirts and free socks. I mean, it made going to the shops really awkward because I was never wearing pants, but it was all good. I guess I kind of fall a little bit sort of in the middle with this, really, in terms of like I get that all of this, all of these shiny new tech can be an element of a distraction, right? But then the counter sort of balance to that is that we're here that we're here that people are suffering from app overwhelm because there's already 1,200 plus apps in the Xero ecosystem and things like that. I think that's nonsense. I think actually what we're suffering from as a general industry is app apathy. I don't think that we engage enough, and I don't think we engage our curiosity enough into sort of seeing what technology is out there. So I do agree with Simon in terms of you've got to have a good strategy, and you've got to understand what the problems are. But this is a bit like VW back in the day. Just carrying on cheating the diesel emissions scandals and not building electric cars, and then all of a sudden they got found out and switched their strategy to start building electric cars. Like, there are lots of practices out there who have 10-year-old plus technology in their practices which is not fit for purpose, and yet they aren't going out there looking for better solutions because they're not, and they should be engaging that level of curiosity and looking for better solutions to improve problems. So yeah, shiny penny syndrome is difficult to manage, but I think, again, if you've got a reasonably clear focus on, don't not look at something just because you don't think it's worthwhile because people are telling you not to look at it. Like, the only things, so to give you an example, right, the only technology that we don't look at as a practice is the agri-tech stuff, because we don't have any clients in that space. So it's completely irrelevant for us to look at it. So we don't have a strategy around agri-tech. We don't have a desire to build up agri clients, because in Manchester nobody's farming. Nobody's growing anything, right? It's a city. It doesn't happen. But that doesn't mean that I don't go looking at the new forecasting tech. That doesn't mean that I don't go looking at the new reporting tech that's out there. It doesn't mean that I go looking that I don't look at anything that might be remotely relevant to what we do. I'm pretty good at dismissing stuff once I've realised that either it's either not ready for us in terms of it's too early stage, or actually it's not solving a problem that we have. I'm quite happy to move on from those things quite quickly. And but more importantly is also to be able to revert back to these things as well. I mean, I think Simon mentioned it as well, is that you've got to keep revisiting the technology that you've got, but also the potential technology that's out there. So again, we've probably all been guilty of sticking with the same practice technology for 5-10 years plus. In the age of cloud, right, you can pick and drop products at will almost. I know people will be up in arms about that in terms of like managing data and everything else, but the reality is that that with cloud, in the same way that when you pick up your phone and you download an app and find out that it's complete garbage, you can bin it off after 2 minutes and try another one. That in the future is going to be where we're at. Maybe not quite within 2 minutes, but certainly in the future we're going to be able to pick and choose practice tech, and if it doesn't really work for us, we'll be able to swap it out fairly quickly.
Yeah, funny enough, my next question was actually going to be around that. How often should you both reevaluate the technology you're using, as well as the technology you've assessed recently? Because, after all, technology evolves and your needs change. So do you have a specific cadence for how often you will reassess a bit of technology that you have within the practice? And equally, what's your thoughts about reassessing technology that maybe wasn't suitable now, but previously wasn't suitable previously, but could be now?
I think for us, to a degree, we would like to say that we're doing it every year or on some kind of annual basis. I think the reality is that almost that's a continual process. I mean, I'm I'm fortunate enough, I guess, to be well known enough in this space that people will come to me with new products, and they'll also come to me with product updates and things. That's not to say that it's possible to do that across the plethora of apps and products that are out there, but we are constantly at shows. We're constantly seeing what the vendors are bringing to those shows and what they're doing. We do have a process for capturing updates which come through on emails and come through on product update websites and things like that, and do that. And actually, I think probably the biggest challenge is once you've got a product in-house is actually keeping on top of all the developments that go into that product, and making sure that your users are also seeing the benefit of those changes. So it's no good, if you've got, I don't know, let's say if you've got Xero in-house, right? It's no good using Xero as if you were using it 10 years ago, because it's moved on so much since then. But are you absolutely certain that all of your users have moved on at the same pace of change? Same with Practice Tech, CCH, and the others. Is that everyone's continually improving, and the biggest challenge is that we kind of learn at a point in time and then almost stop, and that's the challenge for vendors and for product champions, is to communicate how things are progressing. When it comes to stuff that we've looked at, and then maybe we'll cycle back to that probably is a little bit more on an annual sort of basis. But again, because we try to build relationships with the vendors, even if we don't buy at a particular point in time, we do still try to keep in contact with people. So we've got a long list of people that we'll regularly communicate with, whether that's on email, whether that's on LinkedIn, on message boards and chats and groups and stuff. Just sort of keep on top of what's going on with those things, and we're honest as well, I think, which is really important. If we pick a product or look at a product and then say, actually, no, it's not right for us. It doesn't work for us. We want to see this, and this. It maybe goes back to that roadmap conversation. We can at least be really clear with someone to sort of say, we're not going to buy the product now, but if you come back to us in 6 months or in 9 months or in 12 months or whatever, and you've got these features in here, then we'll be willing to have another conversation and revisit that product. And we're doing that now. So we're choosing AML software for the practice at the moment. I had a conversation with a product 12 months ago, and it wasn't ready for us at the time. Had a conversation with another product almost 3 years ago, which certainly wasn't ready for us, and are now just relaunching into the UK, and is pretty much there. And so we've now got a choice of 3 products that we're going to choose from. If we'd not kept those conversations going and not reappraised the market, we would have effectively just gone with one solution and not really had proper visibility of what was available to us.
Simon, what's your thoughts on that? Technology moves at pace, right? And something that is current for today might not be current for tomorrow, and something that wasn't current yesterday might be current for today. How do you kind of look at that? What's your thoughts on it?
So I think I echo what John said in terms of it's continual for me, and I think the other big bit for me is listening. I obviously take maybe a slightly different. So maybe I'm now looking at it from a vendor point of view, right? So we provide our services, we provide our software. I have to listen to what the market's, what's happening in the market. Along with our product director, I'm constantly thinking about, where are we going to make the next thing? What's the next big thing to come? We need to be ahead of the curve. So if we just rely on feedback, sometimes maybe that comes too late, but we have to be continuing looking at the market, what we think the market needs are, and having those kind of more industry-like conversations where we're thinking about where do people want to go? Where do we think the things want to go? So we can give a bit of thought leadership, but also listen to what people are saying. If we're going to continually evaluate technology in that point of view, there's always a lead time, right? We've talked about right from the beginning of this conversation through business drivers and technology principles and implementing software and those things. That's not a short process generally. It's getting shorter, as John alluded to with cloud, the ability to swap in and swap out. Integration points with things are much better these days. So it really is a challenging area to be slightly ahead of the game and actually have your stuff available and ready for those customers that want it. So I think you have to do it continually as a vendor now. You can't afford to go, oh, we've got our annual review of our technology principles, let's go back and have a look at it again. You can't afford to do that. You need to be more aware than that in this ever-changing market. So it is a massive challenge, but you have to find a way of having your finger on the pulse, per se, to really get a good feel of what people need now, but also what they might need in 12, 24 months' time, and utilising technology that's available to get people there.
So we're down to our last 10 minutes of the webinar. I've got a couple of questions I'm going to come to. John, I just want to ask you one more thing before we do. And I guess, a bit of vulnerability and openness on your side. What's the biggest mistake you've made when implementing a new piece of technology?
I'm glad you made it specific, because I was really worried then. I think the biggest mistake that I've ever made is believing my own hype in terms of just thinking that I could do it on my own. As I mentioned before, I think I've been in that place where So to give you some sort of clarity to where my experience. So I've worked at small practices with like 4 partner firms where rolling out technology is quite easy, because you sit in a room with 25, 30 other people and basically go, we're choosing this, we're going to go do it tomorrow, and that's pretty much it. I'm now at a firm with 250 people, 4 offices, many departments, and much more complicated. And certainly in the early days, I came into the firm and thought that I knew everything. Probably still do think that, but thought that just by sort of sheer willpower you could kind of just get something across the line and implement it, and that's fundamentally not the case. So, so for example, you used to work at Capitalise, Phil, and we have only just implemented Capitalise within the practice within the last 4 or 5 months, and that was something that we were talking about 5-6 years ago, something like that.
When I joined them, in fact, you were one of the first people that I spoke to.
Well, there you go. And so that's a classic example of a firm trying to do the right thing, or at least somebody trying to do the right thing, but not having the right process and not having the right plan about how you'd go about making that successful. And sometimes it's down to timing as well. Sometimes you just need to get the stars to align with the right people in the right departments and things. But there's been lots of there's been more failures than successes, certainly to date. But I think the key thing is what you've got to do is you've got to learn from those successes, from those failures. Sorry, there's no point in failing over and over and over again, because that just tells you that you're just getting things wrong every time. If you fail, but fail in different and more creative ways, at least you can figure out what is working and what isn't working, and then try and be more successful. And I would like to think in the last probably 2.5 years, and the pandemic certainly helps to implement technological change, is that we've been more successful in rolling out technology in the last sort of 2.5 years than we ever have as a practice.
I always talk to my team and talk about the idea of failing fast, right? Failing fast and learn quicker. So is that a thing of, if you're going to implement something or do something or try something, try it, and if it doesn't work, evolve it quickly from the lessons you've learned and then try it again. Don't allow something to die over a long period of time and take no learnings from it, because I have no issue with failure. It's just if we don't learn from it, I think where the issue comes from. So yeah, absolutely fail fast and learn faster. So Simon, I've got a good question in the chat about AI. So any ideas about how AI is being used or will be used in accounting? I think you're the ideal man to approach this conversation.
I think there are very specific use cases for AI, and I think we need to be very particular about what AI is and what it gives you. So quite clearly, there's automation tasks that can be AI can really help with, but I think you do need to combine it with the machine learning part of AI as well, right? So similar to what you're just talking about there about learning, obviously the cases I'm thinking of is bringing data in from one place to another, automatically categorizing that data, moving on, sending out automated approvals, that kind of workflow. If you think about that workflow, what you do every day in terms of getting from your client, their data, their information through the tax return process or the accounts process, whichever one you're using, and then off through into your end systems, and whether that be HMRC or corporate company's house or wherever it might be. I think that's where we can really see the advances in AI and ML coming, and particularly I'll throw in there RPA as well, because I just love acronyms, right? But it is really that's where you're going to see the benefit of these things come through. I think there are some things out there already that are doing some really good things in this space, but I think you'll see more of that over certainly the next 12 months. Some of the stuff I really love in my own life when I'm thinking about tech are some of these integration systems that do chain these things together. I'm thinking like ITTT, the If This Then That app. There's a lovely one called Zapata out there that off the back of certain events and processes, the next thing happens. It's basically a workflow, right? But I think that's where you'll really see the advances in that space. So we can start to really automate processes through the accounting process, whether that be integrating different pieces of software, but specifically around data flow. And then therefore the AI and machine learning, understanding what it's doing and learning over time to make sure that it's categorizing data correctly and filing things in the right place and sending out messages to the right people. I think that's particularly where you'll see things happen in the next 12 months or so.
And I think, just to add to that, obviously for anyone that uses products like Dexter Auto Entry, they've been using machine learning now for a good few years. Certainly not in the early days because they had a team in India just plugging in the data, but more recently they are using machine learning and stuff. I think one of the dangers that we have in our space, right, is we talk about AI and it's this sort of mythical beast that's going to either solve all ills or going to get rid of every single member of staff and leave the profession completely bereft. AI is just an umbrella phrase for a number of things, some of which are completely irrelevant to our space, but some of which are massively relevant. So machine learning and that data extraction that Simon's just been talking about, hugely powerful. Things like natural language processing and the potential to be able to interact with your clients, maybe using a chatbot that's not a stupid chatbot that when you ask it a question it doesn't understand, but actually a chatbot that will interact with your systems in the background, your practice management software, your tax software, your account software, and will be able to almost provide advice because most of the advice that we provide at the moment is gated anyway. It's binary. It's you provide information and it's a yes no and you step through, but actually using NLP will be able to also take the nuance out of that. Now that's not something we're going to see tomorrow. It's not going to be something we see in the next 12 months or so, but there are if you happen to go to PwC and you're a personal tax client of PwC, you can get your tax return completed using one of their chatbots on the website. Now that's not full AI. It's certainly not kind of Terminator type stuff that maybe we're familiar with or that we think AI really is. But that shows you the power of being able to do something that doesn't really need any human interaction, because why do we need humans to take data from pieces of information and input it into a piece of software to produce an output that then gets submitted electronically? So AI's got a massive potential in our space, but where the potential really aligns is where it will complement the things that we can do as humans, which is talk to people, understand people, interpret data in a way that's not binary, and also to provide a level of compassion and feeling and thought for our clients and the businesses that we're dealing with. So when we talk about robotic process automation, for example, and it's going to get rid of loads of jobs, well, it is going to get rid of loads of jobs, but they're going to be shitty, crappy jobs that nobody should be doing in the first place. In the same way that machines got rid of people in the cotton mills in Manchester 100 years ago because they should never have been doing that in the first place, but it was just that we didn't have the technology available to make that happen. So that's what's going to happen. And if you want to make it relevant to our world, right, the original spreadsheet was basically just a massive, great big piece of paper which people used to fill out in pencil, and then when something changed they used to rub it out and then change the number and then put a different number in and re-add it up and change it. And now we all use Excel, and we don't even think about original spreadsheet users back in the day who all lost their jobs in the 40s, 50s and 60s because we moved to Lotus and Excel and whatever else at the time.
Brilliant. Thank you. John, Simon, thank you so much for your thoughts on this webinar today. I found it super interesting and hopefully the attendees have as well. Key takeaways for me, define the why. So understand why you're doing something before you do it. Make sure you're open to reviewing what you're doing along the way, including new and old technology, and make sure you're defining the process and you're bringing people in on that journey, because actually that is the best way to make sure that you're successfully implementing the technology. If you want to find out more about what we do here at Wolters Kluwer, don't forget to check out our website. You can look at us on social media and find out more about upcoming webinars and events. We're always doing stuff. And if you're visiting Accounting Web Live in Coventry in a few weeks, please do pop by the stand to say hi and come and say hello. John, I'm assuming you're going to be talking at that event?
I am talking on both days, yes.
There you go. I assumed correctly. And we also have a talk on day 2 from our technology team as well, from Mark. So that should be a really, really interesting talk. Look, thank you everyone for attending today. I hope you've got some good insights out of this. I've absolutely enjoyed hosting it. Have a great afternoon and rest of your day. And we look forward to speaking to you soon. Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.